sure that Scotty is able to hear us right now. Scotty has been appointed as the consumer member, and he still has some paperwork that he is waiting on from the state in order for him to officially join us. But welcome him today as he sits in on our meeting, and we look forward to working with him as soon as the state sends him what he needs to get everything in order so that he might be sworn in. So. Ms. Bendale, would you please enter the statement of necessity into the record?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. This is a telephonic scheduled meeting of the Board of Funeral Directors and Embalmers. Notice of this January 12, 2021 meeting, including the date and time, was posted to the board's website on November 6, 2020. Additionally, this month's agenda was posted to the website on January 7, 2021. As there is not a physical quorum present, a statement of necessity will be read into the record and filed with the Tennessee Secretary of State. Pursuant to TCA 8-44-108B2, which states if a physical quorum is not present at the location of a meeting of a governing body, then in order for a quorum of members to participate by electronic or other means of communication, the governing body must make a determination that a necessity exists. Furthermore, TCA 8-44-108A3 defines necessity as a matter to be considered by the governing body at that meeting requiring timely action by the body. The physical presence by a quorum of the members is not practical within a period of time requiring action, and that participation by a quorum of the members by electronic or other means of communication is necessary. As stated, this was a previously scheduled meeting of the Board of Funeral Directors and Embalmers that is now being held telephonically, and the purpose of this meeting with members attending by teleconference is to conduct regular business, and voting will be conducted by roll call.
Thank you, Ms. Bendale. Everyone has received a copy of the agenda for today's meeting in your email. If there are no suggested changes, we will entertain a motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
Mr. President, I make the motion.
We have a motion by Mr. Rahm, I believe. Do we have a second?
This Anthony, I'll second.
We have a second by Mr. Harris. Any discussion? All in favor? Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Bohannon, will you call the roll?
Fred Berry.
Yes.
Anthony Harris.
Yes.
Tanya Haynes.
Yes.
Clark McKinney.
Yes.
Charles Rahm.
Yes.
Robert Shackelford.
Yes.
Mr. President, passes.
Thank you, Ms. Bohannon. I do not believe we have the minutes from our December meeting, so we will review those at our meeting in February. Entertain a motion to adopt Robert's Rules of Order for our meetings that will take place this year.
I so move.
We have a motion by Mr. McKinney.
Second by Fred.
Second by Mr. Biggin. Any other discussion? If not, Ms. Bohannon, will you call the roll?
Fred Berry.
Yes.
Anthony Harris.
Yes.
Tanya Haynes.
Yes.
Clark McKinney.
Yes.
Charles Rahm.
Yes.
Robert Shackelford.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Bohannon. Everyone should have received a conflict of interest statement in your email from Ms. Bohannon. Ms. Bohannon, can you report if you have received all of those? They were due in yesterday, I believe. Have you received the conflict of interest statements from every board member?
At this time, I haven't received them all, so if you could, after the board meeting, please get those in to me as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next on the agenda is our legal report. So, Ms. Bendale, would you please begin the legal report?
Items number 1 and number 2 are the same set of facts, and I will be recommending the same recommendation to the board, so I'd like to read those together. Item number 1 is against an establishment, and it's complaint 2020-07-4631. This establishment has disciplinary history. And then complaint number 2 is against a funeral director, and that's complaint 2020-07-4641, and this funeral director has no disciplinary history. This was a consumer complaint alleging unprofessional conduct by the respondents. Specifically, the consumer alleged that in August 2020, their mother had passed away, and that initially in September 2020, they were informed that when they picked up their mother's ashes, that they would be able to pick up their mother's belongings. However, when they did arrive to pick up the ashes, they were told that their mother had no possessions with her. The consumer states that they contacted the hospital that informed them that according to the body release form, there were numerous items transferred with the body. The consumer states that they again spoke to the respondent, who stated that because their mother had passed away with COVID, all of her belongings must have been destroyed as well. The consumer indicated that they had spoke with the respondent's funeral director and requested that they double check for jewelry and requested a copy of the body release form, but that the respondent funeral director stated that no jewelry was found and that the deceased was taken from the hospital with no paperwork. The respondent did respond to this complaint, and they provided a detailed timeline of events regarding the removal and cremation of the consumer's mother, which indicated the following: that upon removal of the consumer's mother, no paperwork was given and the body was placed in a body bag due to the deceased being COVID-19 positive. The respondent states that they followed CDC guidelines, guidance from the Tennessee Board of Funeral Directors and Embalmers, and established company policies when removing and cremating the deceased to limit the exposure and spread of COVID-19. The respondent states that the consumer did not mention any personal belongings over the course of 2 weeks prior to cremation. The respondent stated that when the consumer called regarding the personal belongings, they immediately checked the facility. However, they located no belongings, so that they suggested that the consumer contact the hospital. The respondent stated that it was after the consumer contacted the hospital that they learned that the personal belongings were placed in the body bag, which is not normal protocol. The respondent states that due to this extra precaution, the belongings were not noticed. The respondent lastly stated that they informed the consumer that the belongings were present with her mother during the cremation process and that they were responsive to all follow-up emails and calls the consumer had made to them. The consumer did provide a rebuttal stating that they deny the allegations that they did not mention their mother's belongings prior to cremation, and additionally, the consumer provided a copy of the body release form, which indicated that pictures, a radio, tablet, and books were sent with the decedent. Furthermore, the hospital's release form indicates that the family was present at the hospital at the time of the individual's death. It's legal recommendation to do a letter of warning for both the funeral director and the funeral establishment.
Ms. Bendale, would you recommend 2 separate motions to address this matter, even though the recommendation is the same?
If you'd like to change one of them, then I would do 2 separate motions, but if you are in agreement with legal, then you can do 1 motion for both of them.
Thank you.
This is Fred. Was there any confirmation or discussion with the hospital to see if in fact that the items were placed in the body bag?
There was no, I did reach out. There was no confirmation. It's kind of like a dead end trail for me to get in contact with someone at the hospital. But we did really get the body release form, which indicated that there were personal possessions. I could keep looking into it if you would like, but I wasn't able to determine whether or not. The respondent did admit that, they didn't even check the body release bag. So it seems that they're in agreement that the possessions were cremated with the body.
Thank you.
So I'm assuming if they didn't open, and this is Charles, I'm sorry, that if they didn't open the body bag, there was no form of identification as to whether this was the correct individual or not?
I'm not a funeral director, but if that is typically how the funeral director did, views the body, opening the body bag. I didn't look into that as the allegations were regarding the possession. But again, I'd be happy to do that if the board would like me to.
Mr. Rom,
Yes, sir.
my recollection that maybe there was an ID, but not a complete examination of the contents within the bag.
Okay.
And the hospital release form does not indicate any jewelry being present. The items that Ms. Bendale listed there are the totality of the items that was on the form.
All right.
Thank you, Robert.
This is Fred. I'll make a motion to accept a letter of warning.
We have a motion from Mr. Berry to accept council's recommendation. Do we have a second?
I'll second. It's Anthony.
Second by Mr. Harris. Any other discussion? If not, Mr. Bannon, would you call the roll?
Fred Berry,
Yes.
Anthony Harris,
Yes.
Tanya Haynes,
Yes.
Clark McKenzie,
Yes.
Charles Rahm,
Yes.
Robert Shackelford.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Mohan. Next
Item number
complaint.
3 is, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off. Item number 3 is against an establishment. It's complaint 2020-07-5001, and this establishment has disciplinary history. This was a consumer complaint alleging unprofessional conduct. Specifically, the consumer states that on August 7, 2020, the consumer's son passed away, and that on August 9, 2020, they were transferred to the respondent's funeral home. The consumer states that they were asked to see their son on August 10th, and that they were given a quote of $350 to do so. The consumer states that they decided to transfer their son to a different establishment on August 11, 2020, and that they were contacted by the funeral director at this new establishment, who stated that the respondent left the deceased out to decay and rot, and that they recommended that the consumer not see their son in his current condition. The respondent did provide a response, and they indicated the following: that after receiving the deceased, they noticed that the son had been deceased for a while, so they asked to embalm the body. However, the consumer stated no. The respondent states that the consumer never asked to see their son prior to requesting that he be transferred to a different establishment. The respondent stated that after a month after the transfer of the deceased, the respondent received a phone call from the consumer who was screaming about how terrible the respondent is. And the respondent denies the allegations that the body had rotten and provided contact information to obtain reports and photos of the deceased. Based on this information, it's legal's recommendation to close this complaint.
Ms. Bendel, it's Anthony. Was there any embalming authorization forms that they submitted that family had signed or declined either way?
No, they did not submit that, but they did submit, like I said, they provided contact information regarding the deceased, and there was, in the complaint itself, it indicates that the consumer found their son passed away on August 7th. It was unclear as to how long the individual had been deceased prior to that. So I think that was the biggest rebuttal that the respondent had provided, was that the deceased was already in a state of decay when they received them.
Thank you.
This is Fred. Just for my information, in a situation like this, what determines when there's a field investigation and you look through any kind of records, things like that? Just wondering.
Well, so because we have the information to obtain the reports and the photos of the deceased, I chose not to submit to investigation, but I would be more than happy if you guys believe that this would warrant an investigation. I would be happy to do so. There's also additionally, the respondent had apparently reached out to, or the consumer reached out to the respondent, quite a while after the deceased had passed. So there was some timeline issues, a little bit of a he said, she said, and going to a hearing with that information is hard to prove.
This is Fred. I would agree with your statement there. It's kind of he said, she said situation that makes that difficult to really determine maybe what the true facts are. I thought it was interesting that it stated that a $350 quote was given. That's just kind of not typically what we do. That's, a price should be stated on the GPL. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and no documentation was provided to that. It was, again, that was indicated in the complaint, but there was no documentation that there was any actual requests for monies, and the respondent themselves said that that didn't occur. So again, that's a proof issue if we were to take this one to a hearing.
This is Fred. I'll make the motion to accept your closure recommendation.
We have a motion from Mr. Perry to accept the recommendation for closure.
This is Charles, I'll second.
Second by Mr. Hall. Any other discussion? If not, Ms. Bohannon, please call the roll.
Fred Berry,
Yes.
Anthony Harris,
Yes.
Tanya Haynes,
Yes.
Clark McKinney,
Yes.
Charles Rom,
Yes,
Robert Shackelford.
Yes,
Mr. President, the motion passes.
thank you, Ms. Bohannon.
Item number 4 is a complaint against an establishment with disciplinary history. This is complaint 2020-07-5981. This was a consumer complaint alleging that their stepmother had passed away on August 11th, and on September 28th, when they attempted to pick up the death certificate, they noticed that there were errors. The respondent states that they were informed it would take several additional weeks to receive the corrected death certificates, and therefore their probate court date had to be moved for a second time. The consumer states that it was noted that the death certificate had been signed 10 days prior to their original pickup date. However, they were not contacted by the respondent to inform them that the certificate was ready. The respondent's representative did respond to this complaint, and they indicated the following: that the respondent had explained to the family that it takes 4 to 6 weeks to receive a death certificate, that the respondent promptly filed the paperwork to get the death certificate and promptly submitted the corrections when they learned that there was mistakes on the death certificate, and the respondent apologizes for the mistakes, and the corrected death certificates were provided to the family on October 17th of 2020. It's legal's recommendation to do a letter of warning for this one.
Ms. Bendale, do you know if the death occurred in the state of Tennessee?
I believe it did.
Thank you.
It's Anthony. Did they state why they're saying it takes 4 to 6 weeks to get the death certificate? Did the doctor delay it, or any explanation there?
They did not explain that. But like I said, it was indicated by the consumer that the death certificate was ready prior to when they originally picked it up. So that is why legal is recommending this letter of warning. It seems that this was their first offense regarding delaying a death certificate. So that is why we're recommending it, but I'd be happy to take other recommendations as well.
This is Clark. It may have been that 4 to 6 weeks may have been to receive an amended death certificate. That could have been what they meant. But anyway, I'll make a motion to accept council's recommendation.
We have a motion by Mr. McKinney to accept council's recommendation. We have a second.
I'll second. It's Anthony.
Second by Mr. Harris. Any other discussion? If not, Ms. Bohannon, call the roll.
Fred Berry,
Yes.
Anthony Harris,
Yes.
Tanya Haynes,
Yes.
Clark McKinney,
Yes.
Charles Rom,
yes,
Robert Shackelford.
Yes,
Mr. President, the motion passes.
Item number 5 is complaint 2020-07-8461 against an establishment. This was an anonymous complaint alleging that the respondent has false and misleading advertising. Specifically, the complaint alleged that the respondent has multiple prices for the same service listed. The respondent did provide a response to this complaint, and they indicated that they adhere to all state laws and the FTC regarding advertising. The respondent states that they believe the complaint was submitted by a disgruntled ex-employee who was terminated around the same time that this complaint was made. It's legal's recommendation to close this complaint.
This is Fred. So when the complaint was filed, there was really no evidence given.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
when the complaint was filed, there's no evidence given.
Correct. Yes, it was the same time that the ex-employee was terminated from the respondent establishment.
I'll make a motion to accept your recommendation.
We have a motion by Mr. Berry to accept council's recommendation of closure. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a second from Mr. McKinney. Any other discussion? If not, Ms. Bohannon, please call the roll.
Fred Berry,
Yes.
Anthony Harris,
Yes.
Tanya Haynes,
Yes.
Clark McKinney,
Yes.
Charles Rom.
Yeah.
Robert Shackelford.
Yes.
Mr. President, the motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Bohannon.
Items number 6 and number 7 go together, and they are complaint 2020-08-2491 against an establishment with disciplinary history from 2006, and complaint 2020-08-2501 against the funeral director with no disciplinary history. This was a complaint based on a inspection conducted in August 2020. During the inspection, the representative discovered that the funeral director's license for the respondent funeral director had expired on July 1st, 2020, and was not reinstated until July 13th, 2020, during which time the respondent funeral director conducted services and acted as the establishment manager. The respondent did provide a response to the complaint, and they apologized for their oversight. The respondent indicated that as soon as they found out about their license expiration, they rectified the situation. Based on this information, it's legal's recommendation to do a letter of warning for both the establishment and the funeral director.
This is Anthony. I'll make a motion. We accept legal's recommendation.
We have a motion by Mr. Harris to accept legal's recommendation. We have a second.
It's Charles, I'll second.
Second by Mr. Pop. Any other discussion? If not, Ms. Mendel, please call the roll.
Fred Berry,
Yes.
Anthony Harris,
Yes.
Tanya Haynes,
Yes.
Clark McKinney,
Yes.
Charles Rom,
Yes.
Robert Shackelford.
Yes.
Mr. President, the motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Bohannon. I think I just called you Ms. Mendel, so my apologies. We'll correct that in the minutes. Next complaint, please.
The final complaint is complaint 2020-06-2041 against the funeral director with some disciplinary history. This is a competitor complaint alleging unprofessional conduct by the respondent. The complaint indicated that the respondent has made derogatory and offensive remarks toward the complainant and other funeral directors. Additionally, the complainant states that the respondent owes him money and previously had a case in the cooler for over a month, but the respondent would not respond to phone calls. The respondent responded to this complaint and denied the allegations of the complaint. This complaint was sent for investigation, and in December 2020 and January 2021, a board field investigator interviewed and obtained documents from the various parties involved. For the investigation, none of the individuals interviewed were able to provide an exact time frame from when the incidents occurred. One incident appeared to occur as far back as the early 2000s. Based on this information, it's legal's recommendation to do a letter of warning at this time.
This is Fred. This seems like that based on not being able to give any more specific information, timeline. I just don't know if this doesn't need to be a closure versus a letter of warning.
I'd be happy to take that recommendation as well.
This is Charles. I agree with Fred.
Would someone like to put that in the form of a motion?
I'll make it in the form of a motion that instead of warning, that it's closure.
All right, we have a motion by Mr. Rom to close the case rather than accept legal's recommendation. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Fred will second.
All right, we have 2 seconds. I believe by Ms. Haynes was first and Mr. Berry was second. Any other discussion? If not, Ms. Bohannon, would you please call it?
Fred Berry,
Yes.
Anthony Harris,
Yes.
Tanya Haynes,
Yes.
Clark McKinney,
Yes.
Charles Rom,
Yes.
Robert Shackelford.
Yes.
The motion passed. The board's recommendation passes.
Thank you, Ms. Bohannon.
But that completes my legal report for January.
Thank you, Ms. Mendel. Next on the agenda is the Executive Director's report. Mr. Gribble.
Good morning, board members. First item we'll look at will be the financial recap and the 4-year comparative. Give you just a second to pull that up, and if you have access to the one that I sent that has some highlights in it, it might be a little bit easier to follow. Financial data was provided to the board's executive director by the Assistant Commissioner's Office for Regulatory Boards of the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance on October 28, 2020 for use in the compilation of this report. I had reported to the board last year a beginning balance of July 1, 2019 of a reserve balance of $1,088,702. However, upon receiving this information this year, I noticed where that there was an additional investigation cost for fiscal year 18-19 after I'd already made that report to the board. It was my understanding that everything had closed, but apparently there was one thing that had not closed. So in order to keep our figures correct, we need to take $582 from that and have an adjusted beginning balance July 1, 2019 of $1,088,120. The revenue, the net revenue, our earnings for July 1, 2019 through June 30th, 2020 was $752,861. Now let's skip down one line there. And the total expenditures for July 1, 2019 through June 30th, 2020 was $571,607, which would be a revenue over expenses in the amount of $181,254, or a net gain, a profit, whatever word you want to use to indicate that we had more money than we had expenses. So when you add that together, that leaves a reserve balance for July 1, 2020 of $1,269,374. First of all, let me stop there and ask, are there any questions about that particular part of it? And then we'll go into the next page.
Mr. Gribble, might want to remind people that about the every other year
Yes.
situation where we fall short and then we gain every other year.
Yes, that's correct, Mr. McKinney. If you look on the second page in the highlighted, next to the last highlighted area where it says fiscal year balance, you'll see that for the 4 years, the first one is a deficit of $136,881. Second one is a positive of $132,889. Then a deficit of $149,140, and then a positive of $181,254. And that's what Mr. McKinney is talking about. And what causes that is, for many years, all license expired on June 30th of even numbered years. And then it was decided that those should be different expirations, just like car tags, vehicle tags are, that they expire different times during the year. But at that time, funeral directors and embalmers did not want and establishments didn't want their expirations changed where that they would, the ones that were June the 30th wanted to keep that. So in other words, all the older licenses that were issued still have a June 30th expiration on the even number of years. And that causes, on the even number of years, we typically have a positive, and on the odd years, we'll have a deficit. But what the legislature looks at is a 2-year comparison. And of course, then we have a reserve balance also beyond that. But what we need to make sure is that we're, you know, we don't need to make money, but we don't need to lose money. The ideal is to have a zero each time, but that doesn't always happen, and never does really happen. It's always a plus or minus. Anything else to this point? And then we'll look at the second page. So this is a 4-year comparative from beginning with fiscal year 16 and 17. So that's July 1st, 2016 through June 30th, 2017, and then move to fiscal year 17-18 and fiscal year 18-19. And then the last column was the fiscal year that ended June the 30th of 2020. So you can look there and see, see how things compare for those 4 years. I'm not going to go line by line, but again, I'll be glad to answer any question that you have. But I would call your attention just about the middle of the page, right above that, there's a little green underline where it says State Professional Services, then parentheses 725. And if you look at those first 3 years, you see they all pretty well are 52, 54, and 54,000. So they're in the 50s. Well, this last year, that jumped to $211,857, a huge increase. So here's what is done different. And this was the reason we were holding on this, is that I wanted to double check, make sure that I don't want to report anything incorrectly to the board. But if you look just below where it says grand total in the middle of the page, you'll see another highlighted area called cost backs, and then a green underlining that says included in account 725 for fiscal year 19 and 20. So basically $169,785, which is normally added separately, was added in to state professional services in account number 725. So if you subtracted basically 170,000 from 212,000, then you would see that figure would just be 40-something thousand dollars. So it's not an increase, it's actually a decrease. It's just a different way that they have provided the documentation to us on the 4-year comparison. So those cost backs, that's administration, investigations, legal, field enforcement, customer service center, and centralized complaints. Obviously administration, that's the department administration. Investigation is the reason that our costs are not very expensive. There is $1,917 in investigation. Funeral board has our own investigator, and our investigator does about 90 to 95% of all the investigations. But there's reasons at different times when the investigative section of the regulatory board's division needs to be used. And when that is used, then we're billed for that so much per hour. So that's why there's $1,917 there, $1,917. Legal is self-explanatory. Obviously, that includes all legal services that we get for the division, all the way up through the general counsel. And field enforcement, the reason there's no charge for field enforcement's a section within the regulatory boards that does inspections for Motor Vehicle Commission, for Cosmo and Barbara, and I'm not sure who else. But of course, we have, by statute, our field enforcement people are required to be funeral directors and embalmers and be certified as a crematory operator if they're inspecting a crematory. So we have our own people. So those expenses that you would normally see for investigation and field enforcement are included up at the top in salaries. And then that information. Customer Service Center and centralized complaints, that's a special area. Customer Service Center is where all the calls are entered by, the Zendesk tickets. When someone contacts the department, that's who they receive, and we get billed according to our use of that. And centralized complaints, there's a central area where all the complaints are filed for all the reg boards division, and that's our cost back on that. So these cost backs total $169,785, and again, that's included up at the top. So you see our licensing revenue, and then that's a good comparison there to that 2-year thing that we talked about earlier. Case and complaint revenue, that's the money that is paid for civil penalties. We don't budget anything for that. There's no quota for that. I always like to make that clear, because sometimes people will say, well, they were just out writing notices of violations, and that's not the case. You can see that for fiscal year 19 and 20, that amount was $10,200. State regulatory fee, that is a deduction. That's a fee that has to be paid to finance and administration based upon their number of licensees. And you can see then what the net revenue was, what their fiscal year balance was, the prior fiscal year, and then which brings it down to and there was no core expenses this past year that we had to pay from the program. Now, there were core expenses, but not that we had to pay directly from the program. So the reserve balance after the core expenses would be $1,269,374. What questions do you have? Make a comment that when some boards are audited, this is something the controller's office is looking at. And when the reserve gets to this amount, it gets looked at closely as maybe being too much. And the board has done two things in the past 4 or 5 years to reduce fees. And so the question might come up again, well, why aren't fees reduced more? Well, if you go back and look at those fiscal year balances, and you look at those, there's not a lot of money to play with, because next year probably we're going to have a deficit somewhere around, based on what the deficit was in 18-19, probably a deficit of $150,000 to $200,000. So that will reduce this amount by whatever the deficit is. Of course, that's we can look into that further if the board is interested in doing things, but the licensing fees were reduced, and for the funeral director and embalmer's license, the apprentice funeral director, the apprentice embalmer, and the student registration fees have been reduced by the board at two different times in the past 3 or 4 years. So just wanted to mention that. Food for thought. We can, be glad if the board members want us to talk about it further. Be glad to, pull together numbers or something you can think about. But of course, this year has been an unusual year, and something else. I wanted to point this out too. I said I went, and I'm not going to go line by line. But you can see where the travel expense, if you go back up toward the top, right below the salaries, the travel expense there is about $6,000 to $10,000 less than it normally is, and of course that there been no in-person board meetings since, I guess, well, I know we've not had any since March, so that reduced that, and we constantly try with the 2 field reps and investigator. They constantly work their schedule to try to make it where it makes the most efficient and effective way in their travel to reduce their expenses as well. So that's one reason why that's lower than it normally is. And when and after the pandemic's over, then that's probably going to go up as well. Anytime that we have to replace laptops and things of that nature, printers, scanners, then we have a greater fee for that. As each one of you board members know, each board has to generate its own revenue and has to pay for all of its expenses. This money is money from licensees, and it's not state tax dollars per se, because it's each board has to be responsible to generate their own revenue and pay all their expenses. And that has been done, and that's what the balance is.
Mr. Gribble, is it still the case that this reserve balance from time to time can be, for lack of a better term, raided by the administration if they see that there's a significant balance and maybe they want to move that money to the general fund, or has that situation been taken care of?
It's my understanding that still remains the law, that it can be, funds can be accessed, the reserve funds can be. I can tell you in the last administration that did not occur. In this administration, it has not occurred. And when I'm talking about administration, I'm talking about the governor. And previous to the last administration, it only occurred in a very small amount one time. So it's not as normal as it used to be. When Mr. Shackelford's dad was serving on the board back in the 1990s, and at that time, that was something they had to deal with on a consistent basis, because it was just a consistent thing that the Red Board's money got raided to pay for other things. And fortunately, that's not happened to any great extent in the past many years, and has not happened at all for the past 10 to 12 years. But it's something to keep in mind. It's something that could happen.
Robert, could you state again what the state regulatory fee is that's under the case and complaint revenue?
That is a fee that's paid by statute that each board has to pay to the Department of Finance and Administration, and it's based on the number of licenses. And I know that it's larger this time than it normally is. I had a question as to whether or not apprentices and general directors, apprentice embalmers, and students got included in that, because that's really not a license, that's a registration. And I was told that the amount was correct and that they were not included. So I know that's a larger amount than we normally see, but then compared to other boards, it's when I looked at that, then I thought, well, it's in line.
Okay, thank you.
Of course, if you look back 2 years ago, that fee was a little bit more than what it is this year. So it was $25,880 for fiscal year 17-18, which is the even numbered year. That when I say this year, I'm obviously talking about the fiscal year 19-20 that ended June the 30th. As I said, I got this information on October the 28th, and I didn't have time to process it and do what I need to do to check it out for the November meeting. And then in December, there were other things going on. We had some other things that were from the department-wise we're working on, and so I wanted to put some time into it to study it so that I was okay with it. I look at we get a financial statement each month, financial records each month from the assistant commissioner's office, and I review those. And if there's an issue with them, then we have people that we go to and talk to them about it, and get that clarified. So this is the compilation of each one of those months, obviously. And but we look at this on a consistent basis. The division looks at it on a consistent basis, and we want to always be in a positive and not a negative, but at the same time, it's not our goal, or it's not anyone's goal for the fees to be any more than necessary to operate the program. And something else I wanted to say is, all of you know, with funeral home and what happened this year, there can be some very unknown things happen that could cause a lot of financial distress to a program. So we would like to have a year to 2 years operating expenses. And if you look at this, and remember I said the expenditures last year, rounding it off, $572,000. So if you look at that, then that's about what we have in reserve, is about 2 years operating expenses. And again, keep in mind that reserve figure is going to be reduced by probably between $150,000 and $200,000 by June the 30th of 2021. So we're going to have a little less. Right now we got a little more than 2 years operating expenses, but then we'll have a little less. Anything else on that? Any other questions? We can come back to it if there are.
I've got one on maybe a little different subject, but I'll save that till you get through with your report if you want me to.
Or whatever you want to do.
Well, I noticed that seems like this summer, this past year, we've had a lot of license that have lapsed or were late renewals, and it may just be me, but it just seemed like there was more than normal. Is there anything in the works to perhaps send a second notice postcard or an email to these licensees so that hopefully that they don't lapse, or is it just me thinking that we had an unusual year this time?
No, that's a very good question. At one time, there was a core upgrade in September, and going back and looking at that, and the department spent a lot of time in revisiting that. There were some times that the proper notices. Again, well, let me preface it by saying this: the licensee should know when their expiration date is and should be responsible for renewing their own license. However, the board sends a letter to each licensee letting them know when their license expires about 60 days before the expiration date of the license. But in this core upgrade that went into effect in September, it appears that some people did not receive the notice that they normally get. There is, in the process now, either through postcards or emails, as you mentioned, Mr. McKinney, and I don't know when it will really come into play, but that has been discussed. How can we let these people know we get down to 10 to 14 days before expiration date and they've not renewed? How do we let them know? Now, let me make you aware of this. Our board does something that probably most boards can't do because of the size. Ms. Bohannon she'll go through and search and make a list of the funeral establishments, and this is not the funeral board, but just so you know, the funeral establishments, the pre-need cellars, and the cemeteries that have not renewed about 2 weeks before the expiration of each month's expiration. And she'll send that list over to the administrative assistants, and they will divide up and call those people. So every funeral home, every cemetery, and every pre-need cellar gets a phone call if they've not renewed somewhere between 10 to 14 days before their license expires. And I appreciate them taking the time to do that because it does consume some time. And I wish that we could do it for the funeral directors, the embalmers, and the pre-need sales agents, but because of the numbers, we can't do that and do it and keep our other work and keep it moving like it should. But to your point, there's some processes going into place, and that's something that the division has looked at. That's something that the administration's looked at. And let me say too that there has been some waiving of late fees because each one of those, and Ms. Bohannon can explain this better than I can, but the director of operations went in and it went as far as looking to see when each licensee got their notice and things like that. And also, our commissioner was very concerned. He didn't want any action to be taken, and rightfully so, against anyone who didn't renew in time if they did not receive a notice, even though that each one of us are responsible to renew our own license. And so there's been a lot of grace, but that's ending because the system is fixed and it's repaired. And that's ending. So the other thing is to do the postcard or emails, and probably the emails are the easiest way to remind people that their licenses are running late or running close by. It's time for them to renew it.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to legislative update for this meeting. Our office has not received any official notification from either the Tennessee State Funeral Director and Morticians Association or the Tennessee Funeral Directors Association of new legislation that they intend to pursue during the 112th General Assembly, which convenes today at 12 noon. So in a little over an hour, that the legislature will be in session. We extend an open invitation to both associations and any other interested parties to meet with their staff and other appropriate departmental individuals prior to the introduction of legislation affecting the Board of Funeral Directors and Embalmers. And to make you aware, it's most likely that a regulatory reform administration bill will be introduced in this upcoming session. It will do three things. One is it will reduce the number of required working hours for an apprentice from 40 hours per week to 32 hours per week. Number two, it would allow for universal licensing recognition through a more streamlined and simplified process. And three, it would exempt a person from registration as a pre-need sales agent who is licensed as a funeral director and is selling pre-need funeral contracts only on behalf of the person's own funeral establishment. And again, this is up from a high level. The bills have not been introduced. So, there's the General Assembly has a website where you can go and look at any bill that search we have provided for you before. So you can go and search later on. And of course, there'll be more information at the next board meeting. Any questions on that?
Mr. Gribble, do you have a definition or any insight into the term universal licensing?
It's my understanding, Mr. Shackford, that it will, and again, this is from a high level, but if a person has been licensed in another state in the scope of practice that they would be working in Tennessee, and they have been licensed in that other state for 1 year, then their license would be recognized and they would be issued a licensure in Tennessee, but the board could still require the individuals, and unless the board decided not to, they would still be required to take a Tennessee laws and rules examination, a specific, exam for Tennessee laws and rules. But it's to streamline it, it's to make it more uniform. And I understand that maybe this has been done in other states so that it'll be easier for people who are moving from state to state or who are on state lines to get licensed. It would probably, and again, the bill hasn't been introduced, but most likely it would not require waiting on the applicants to get a transcript, to get copies of where they had passed their board exams, or letters of recommendation, things of that nature. It would be, as I mentioned, a more streamlined process so that they could be issued a license in a quicker or sooner amount of time.
Do you know if the bill will require a reciprocal agreement with the other states? For example, Kentucky, would the bill require that Kentucky would also recognize Tennessee's licensees in the same manner that we're proposing to recognize Kentucky's licensees?
I don't think so. I think that it would probably be dependent upon each state to adopt their own legislation. And I don't think that it would, but I don't know. Like I say, there's some regulatory reform legislation that's more than likely going to be introduced, and it appears that that these are items that are going to be contained within that.
Mr. President, if I can make a comment about that reciprocating the license, that for me personally, and I think most of our Tennessee licensees, that would be a poison pill to just for us to willy-nilly take somebody's or reciprocate a license from another state when they do not have the same educational requirements, maybe the same apprenticeship requirements. All they have to do is just work in another state for 1 year. I don't think our licensees that have had to jump through several hoops are going to be too favorable for that, but that's just my opinion.
Well, I was not proposing it. I was just asking the question as to whether or not the bill would include language that addresses that type of issue.
Yes, sir. I'm clear on that. I know where it's coming from.
Okay, to move on, Mr. President.
Yes, sir.
Okay, report of licenses administratively approved by the executive director pursuant to the board authority for the period of December 5, 2020 through January 8, 2021. As you can see, we had 2 establishments that changed location, and then had 2 individuals, one who got a funeral director and embalmer, well, both got a funeral director and embalmer's license. One of those was through reciprocity. And you'll notice each month when we give you this report, we have a number of people that do get licensed now through reciprocity through the Board of Funeral Directors and Embalmers. Proposed establishment report. There's one establishment reported closing since the last board meeting. That's Rucker Memorial Chapel, which was located at 1505 Bradyville Pike, Murfreesboro. Mr. Rucker passed away last year during the year, and it was my understanding they intended to operate that business for a while after her death, and then changed their mind, and they voluntarily did a closed establishment on that. Disciplinary action report. The report of consent orders have been administratively accepted or approved by the executive director pursuant to board authority as reported on the November 2020 regulatory board's disciplinary action report. And you have 2 funeral homes there that had violations and paid a civil penalty of $250 each. The complaint report. Number of complaints as of January 8, 2021. As far as funeral director and embalmer, there were 13 of those. As far as establishments, there were 24, which makes a total of 37 open complaints. That concludes my report. I'll be glad to answer any questions or follow up on anything that you wish for me to do.
Motion to approve the report.
All right, we have a motion by Mr. Rahm to approve the executive director's report as presented. Do we have a second?
Second.
Anthony, I'll second.
We have a second by Mr. Harris. Any other discussion? If not, Ms. Knight, would you call the vote?
Fred Berry,
Yes.
Anthony Harris,
Yes.
Tanya Haynes,
Yes.
Clark McKinney,
Yes.
Charles Rahm,
Yes.
Robert Shackelford.
Yes.
Mr. President, the director's report has been approved.
Thank you, Ms. Bohannon. We have one establishment license application to review from Smith Family Funeral and Cremation Services in Smyrna, Tennessee. And I believe we have with us today Mr. John H. Smith, and I presume that might be Mr. Jeffrey Lynn Walden as well. But if not, Mr. Smith, you may introduce the person that is with you, and you may speak to the board at this time if you would like.
Yes, sir. Mr. President, Mr. Shackelford, thank you for taking the time to review our application. This is Mr. Jeffrey Walden next to me, licensed funeral director and embalmer extraordinaire. Very proud to have him with me. Just want to address any questions you may have, and hopefully you all see fit to give us an approval.
Mr. Smith, could you tell us a little bit about your history in funeral service and any other locations that you may operate or any other background that you would like to give us?
Yes, sir, I sure can. I graduated from John Gupton College in 2020. And after that, I won't bore you with all the details, but I didn't really come back into the funeral business till around 2010. And while I was wrapping up grad school at Trevecca, I felt called to, anyway, I'm going to try to skip some of the details, but give you some of the pertinent stuff about highlights of my life. I ended up working for SCI at Mount Olivet. I worked my way into general management, did that for a number of years, then I was called back into grad school at Trevecca. So while I was doing that, I felt the need to step down from my GM position. And I'm blessed to have a wife who is a CFO for an organization. She was able to kind of float the expenses for the house. But once I finished that, I felt led to open my own business, at which point I sat before you all back 3.5, 4 years ago and presented to you the idea of Smith Family Funeral and Cremation Services, a low overhead business model for Murfreesboro. Since we've opened up, I am very blessed. This year we're closed up with about 340 calls. We've been open for 3 years. We were also blessed to open up a crematory at the end of 3 years as well. So we currently have our first location here in Murfreesboro, our first ministry spot, where we also have behind us the crematory. And now we're hoping to duplicate our business model, not entirely, but more just a satellite location, storefront in Smyrna. It will be just a location where we meet with families to write contracts, and that's about it. We're trying to keep it very simple and clean and neat. I recognize there's a paradigm in our industry, and I'm just hoping that Smith Family is on the leading tip of the spear, or at least on the spear somewhere to meet the needs of the families. And so I attribute that a lot to our success, our business model. And again, I'm hoping to duplicate, in a sense, the business model that we have here in Murfreesboro.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
We will open the discussion to any board members who may have questions.
Mr. President, it's Anthony. I've got a quick question. I noticed on the application here, it's marked that the establishment is not going to sell pre-need at this location. And then under remarks, it looks as if the establishment will register after the fact. Can you give some guidance on that, what you guys are wanting to do?
Yes, sir. And I think you were addressing that to me, Mr. Harris. Yes. So that was kind of an afterthought. I thought in my mind, of course, the lack of understanding, we'll call it that, or my ignorance, I guess. I thought that what I would do is just offer pre-need through my main location here and try to keep it simple. I'm kind of a simple man. My business model is very simple. And in the spirit of simplicity, I thought, well, we'll just all my pre-need will run through Smith Family Murfreesboro, and I would make sure that families were aware of that at the time. But I've learned since then that we probably need to have, each location needs to have its own pre-need. So that was the change, or what prompted that change on the paperwork. Forgive me if I failed to make that clear on my application.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
This is Clark. Mr. Smith, this appears to be just a storefront place to make arrangements. And of course, that's what's before us today, but do you have plans to expand in that location at some time?
No, sir, I do not.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. President, I make a motion that the applicant be approved for licensure.
We have a motion by Mr. Rahm to approve the application for licensure. Do we have a second?
It's Anthony, I'll second.
We have a second by Mr. Harris. Any other discussion? If not, Ms. Bohannon, please call the roll.
Fred Berry,
Yes.
Anthony Harris,
Yes.
Tanya Haynes,
Yes.
Clark McKinney,
Yes.
Charles Rahm,
Yes.
Chris Shackelford.
Yes.
Mr. President, the motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Bohannon. And thank you, Mr. Smith, Mr. Walden. Congratulations to you both.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Smith, we'll get the license to you by email. It may be tomorrow, but later today or tomorrow, we should have that to you.
Mr. Gribble, thank you.
You're welcome.
I want to thank the whole board as well.
You're welcome. Is there any new business that needs to be brought before the board this morning?
Mr. Shackelford, this is not necessarily a item for the board to vote on, but out of my curiosity, and so we kind of, I guess, learn in this meeting, I would like for each board member, if they don't mind, not specifically about yourself, but I know it's very concerning about the vaccine. So, and I know that different parts of the state are doing it a little bit different. So if each board member would just take a second to tell us whether or not it's been available to their staff, and it doesn't really matter whether the staff has chosen to participate or not, but since we're cross-sectional state, I think it'd be interesting to know what's happening in the area.
Mr. Gribble, this is and all of our staff have gotten their first shot and will be going for our second shot on the 23rd of this month.
We have, Clark, we have been on the list for at least a week, maybe, and we haven't heard anything yet.
Our health department's Hardin County, Hardeman County, Chester County, and Marion County offered the vaccine to all of our employees about 2 weeks ago for their first shot.
This is Fred in Knox County. We've had 3 opportunities for vaccination, and so the process moving forward.
This is Tanya. We haven't received an email, nor has anyone reached out to us in Davidson County for the vaccine, nor in Rutherford County.
This is Anthony, here in Washington County, our whole staff has received it. Second shot will be on the 27th.
I noticed in the national paper today, Ms. Haynes, that there was some information about the vaccine and things like that, and maybe a different way that they're going to start doing it, but it might be that you want to reach out to the health department, and if you can get in touch with them, the local health department, Metro Health Department,
Okay.
to see the different funeral directors across the state did work in order to maybe be able to move the funeral directors up to the spot to where it's available. My understanding, the first determination, the funeral directors weren't included, and there were several funeral directors that did quite the work to get that changed. Probably funeral directors associations as well. So that was the information that I was concerned about, and hopefully Ms. Haynes, you'll be able to get that for you and your staff if they wish to participate soon.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Is there any other item of new business that needs to be brought before the board today?
Mr. Shackford, job well done on your inaugural presidential meeting.
Well, I've just got big shoes to fill, Mr. McKeon, so as I told you on the phone, we're talking next time, you'll always be the president from now on. That'll just stick from now on. So we appreciate your good service to the board, and thank you for that. We look forward to the time when we can all be together again, not just virtually, but physically, and enjoy that fellowship and camaraderie, and we'll look forward to a good meal together as well as soon as we can make that happen. So,
With that being said, Mr. President, I make a motion we adjourn.
all right, we have a motion by Mr. Rom to adjourn. Do we have a second?
This is Anthony, I'll second.
Second by Mr. Harris. I'm assuming there's no further discussion on that. So, Ms. Hannah, would you please call the roll?
Fred Berry,
Yes.
Anthony Harris,
Yes.
Tanya Haynes,
Yes.
Clark McKinney,
No, I'm just kidding. Yes.
Charles Rom,
Yes.
Robert Shackelford.
Yes.
Motion passes, President.
Thank you, Ms. Boyd. Thanks to everyone for your participation in the meeting today. And congratulations, Mr. Smith. You and Mr. Wadham are doing well in your endeavors. We stand adjourned at 11:09 p.m. Everyone have a great day.
Have a great week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.